Hey, whoa. I always wondered, where are you from?
I'm from Houston, Texas. I'm half black and half Mexican. On my dad's side, we're like Louisiana Creole from Natchitoches, Louisiana, and then my mom's side, she's from LA. Her mom is from Jimenez, Mexico.
That's
So
super
yeah,
cool. I didn't know that about you.
thanks. Where are you from?
I grew up in Arizona. And welcome to Cafecito. So, we started that because Wo and I had a conversation before we had our first meeting for all of this, where we had conflicting views on whether or not we wanted everyone to self identify on race. I personally feel really strongly about the idea that it's diminishing of my strong association to my nationality of being American, and that it is often used to undercut the fact that I don't look American enough for people. And so I don't like to bring it up unless I think it's relevant. And whoa.
Meanwhile, I like to get out ahead of other people and tell them what my mix is so that they don't make annoying assumptions or offend me by making assumptions. So,
And we felt like both were really valid. So we wanted to start it off with something like that. And we want to invite you all to do what you think is right for you. And so when we get to different questions, you're welcome to bring it up, and it's totally up to you.
all right. Welcome to Cafecito. This is Quemoción. Today's Cafecito is Yo amo mi mezcla. That means I love my mix. We are here talking with other amazing mixed and multiracial artists and people about what it means to be multiracial and mixed race. And I'm so excited just seeing you guys' faces. Like it's so cool to be in a mixed room.
Yeah. And so we want to get started by just introducing everyone quickly. I am Jasmine Malave. I am an actor, writer, and teaching artist in New York.
I'm Wo. I'm a musician, an actor, and a writer from Houston, Texas, and I'm about to move back to New York.
We've got G.V. Maldonado joining us, puppeteer, stage manager, and teaching artist.
And then we have Henry Dominguez, artist and activist, who also created the mural Amo Mi Mezcla, which inspired this talk.
And then we also have Mayalin Perdomo Santos, a performer and writer.
And last but not least, Hilda Mason, um, actress extraordinaire. All right, so like I said, this is a space for multiracial people who identify as half Latinx and another non-white race. We really wanted to have this talk and highlight um, non-white mixed voices because we found that like a lot of the conversation around mixed people is often around people who are, half black and half white, or, half Latinx and half white. And so we found that like even in conversations about like mixed race people, we're still like hearing white voices like dominating the conversation. So we wanted to have this space for just us. And it's very exciting. So sort of the like main, domain of our conversation is going to be about like multiracial people in the United States, but we can also talk about Latin America because there are like different dynamics between those two regions. Um, and we actually had so much like trouble defining like what was a multiracial or like biracial or mixed race person. Um, you know, I brought up like, oh, it means you're from like an interracial family, and then some people were like, no, that's not what it means. And so what we ultimately
Ultimately,
settled on, what?
oh yeah, I was just going to jump in a little and just say that we ultimately decided that like that's not an answer that we can make for other people, and everyone self-identifies. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like we kind of came on, if you're someone who like is constantly questioning like whether you belong to a certain like race or something, that's probably a sign that you might be multiracial. Um, so just like a brief little history lesson on mixed race people in the US and Latin America. So in the US, because of the way that like English colonization happened and like slavery happened here, the US was founded on like a black white binary. So basically, you were either white or black. And like there was the one drop rule where, like, if you had like a drop of black blood, basically, then you were black. Um, And there were all sorts of like laws against miscegenation, which was like the mixing of the races, and interracial marriage was also illegal. Um, and there were also laws, to keep the races separated and segregated. So like mixed race people, interracial relationships were very like taboo for like much of American history, all the way up until like, post civil rights and sometimes even today. Um, and then in Latin America, um, the way that like the Spanish and the French colonizers worked it out was that they like allowed races to mix more. So, people of African heritage that were brought over through slavery mixed with, Europeans and Native Americans. And that created like mestizaje, the mixing of like races that like a lot of Latin American countries pride themselves on. But it's also all been within like a white power dynamic where, the more white you are, like you're mejorando la raza or whatever, and like making, your country better by being more white. So that's just like a little history lesson. Now I'm passing over to Jasmine.
And we just also wanted to say quickly that we don't agree with this zero sum fallacy that's been going around. There's plenty of space for everybody, and because we take some space doesn't mean that we're literally taking it from somebody else. And so, like, the goal, or at least one of the goals of the conversation, is that we want to avoid the oppression Olympics. We're just here to have a conversation about what being mixed races to us. And so I found some really interesting stats that Pew Research had done in 2015. So I'll start it off with what they put as their opener, but it is that multiracial Americans are at the cutting edge of social and demographic change in the US. Young, with the average being 19 years old, and proud, tolerant, and growing at a rate of 3 times as fast as the population as a whole. Even Pew Research found in 2015, though, that although, they're trying to paint a portrait of multiracial Americans and trying to conduct this survey, they even acknowledged in the very beginning that Hispanic origin is asked about separately as an ethnicity and is not considered a race. But when Latinos are asked whether they consider being Hispanic to be part of their racial or ethnic background, the survey finds that about 2/3 of Hispanics say it is, at least in part, their race. For the majority of this report, Hispanic origin is treated as an ethnicity rather than a race, and it separates races. So some of the data I'm going to have later doesn't even include Hispanics because they didn't put that as part of the mixed race because it's an ethnicity. This is consistent with how the Census Bureau counts mixed race Hispanics. So my first question for everyone as we go in is going to be related to this stat. Is 1 in 4 mixed race adults say that people are often or sometimes confused by their racial background. And 1 in 5 say that they have felt that they were a go-between or a bridge between different racial groups. So how does being biracial play out in your lives, in your relationship with family or friends or etc.? Some like sub versions or different versions of this question could be, what's your favorite story about people being confused by your mix or trying to figure out what you are? What's your most distinct memory of your own family pulling you in different directions in regard to racial expression? What are the unique blessings of being biracial, or maybe unique joys or uniquely confusing moments? And do you speak Spanish? And how do others make you feel about it?
You first. um, so hi, Milda. I am from Panama. I moved here 7 years ago. This is my 8th year in New York. And I, many things. There are many questions that you just said, but funnily enough, today I went to the doctor, and to check into the doctor, you have to say what is your, and like, under race, I am always very confused by this because of these type of formulas that you are given. And I'm like, well, I guess I have to define myself as something. And most of the times, yeah, there's no like mix or, and what's funny is that growing up in Panama, I never identified as anything. I don't know if that's because, I mean, I moved when I was like 23. So it's not like I was a baby, but then we didn't talk about it. Panama is such a melting pot of cultures and races and everything that I was just a person. I didn't identify as mixed or white or black. And one of the few times in real life that this was brought to my attention that I was mixed here was I went on vacation with my two best friends. We went to the beach, spent 4 days under the sun. And at the end, I was like, oh my God, I look so black. And one of my friends was like, Ilda, you are black. Your dad is black, remember? And I was like, oh my God, that is so true. My dad is black and my mom is white, as in like Panama was colonized by Spain and then we're part of Colombia. So we have that European side. But until that moment, like 3 years ago, it did not hit me. Like, oh, that's right. I always just identified here as Latina. That was the little box, a beautiful, nice box that I was like put in when I got here as an actor, and was like, okay, you are Latina, you're a dancer, you da da da. So you're gonna be in West Side Story, and you're gonna be in everything that speaks Spanish, and you're gonna be in. So it did help me in many things that I was put in that group, but honestly, I never saw it as like my dad is black, so I am part black. I don't know. That's just because maybe in my naive mind, I didn't see that. We didn't see that race thing, that racism that you see here. That is like, what are you? Are you black? Are you white? What is it? So
Pick a
that's my, yeah, pick a team, exactly. None of that in Panama. So
I think that I saw Henry's hand go up.
Yeah, I think I have a similar experience as Rita Ilda. I moved to New York when I was about 8 years old, and I didn't leave New York until I was 16. When I was going to college in very small private liberal art, predominantly white town, and a lot of people would ask which one of my parents was white and which one was black, and for a while I didn't know how to answer because for me the answer was neither, and it would just mind boggle them. Like, okay, no, like talk. Who are you? And I come from Dominican Republic, and here a lot of people look exactly like me. I don't feel like I look outside of what Dominicans look like, but then there is no really like profile for Dominicans. We come in all colors, shapes, and sizes. So I think I touch upon it on my little section of the los muros that I feel like I am a synthesis of like 400 years ago, and I am black and I am white, but it's been mixing for so long that now I feel the need to identify with both. I've even taken my ethnicity genealogy test where I had to send like a little bit of saliva back to take some lab, and I got my results back, and now I can tell you the percentages, I guess. And I'm about 30% black, and then 90% European, and then about 10% Native American. And I don't know how truthful that is, but I'm running with those numbers up until now.
I feel that a lot. I think that Mayalyn, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I also relate to these experiences that Isla and Henry just talked about. I'm Dominican, born in the States, so my parents are both emigrated from the Dominican Republic. And like Isla, this idea of like having these multiple races within me, I just came to that realization last year, right? Like mid last year of being mixed race. Um, because all my life it was always Hispana or Latinx, right? And I think a lot about how like how Ila said about how in Panama they don't think about like races. I would say it's the same thing in DR, right? Race is not thought of as a black or white. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And that's something that I'm just now learning why that is historically, that there's a reason why like it's not thought of as like black and white. It's that mestizaje, if you will. So I just thought that that's interesting because I think it depends on context as well, right? Like in DR, I don't ever think of myself as black or white, but here I'm in this nebulous space. Like when I'm checking off the boxes, I did take my 23andMe, right? Technically, I could check off white and I could check off Black, Afro-Caribbean, right? And I could check off Indigenous, but I don't, in a real life experience, I don't necessarily have those experiences, right? I don't have a Black experience in spaces, right? Nobody sees me as Black. And yet parts of my culture are Afro, right? Like the way we dance, the words that we use. Yeah, so it's just really interesting that way.
Yeah, it's very difficult to navigate. And GV, you wanted to say something?
Hey, so I'm GB Maldonado. I'm a Nuyorican storyteller and arts educator. And my experience comes from being Nuyorican, so from Puerto Rico, from New York, American and Puerto Rican, American, forced to be an American because Puerto Ricans never decided to become Americans. It was forced upon them in the early in 1917. And so my experience comes from that of being triracial, of being white, Black, and Indigenous. And it, and we are afforded the luxury of being able to take these little swabby tests and send them out and boast about what are our numbers. And I, like, so I have my numbers. I know what my numbers are, and all of it still means that I am still me. I am the legacy of all the people who came before me. And so that's where I am now. Like I agree very much with like Jasmine and your train of thought of like, no, you're from Arizona. Like that's where you ended up. That's where, where you are. I'm from New York. Like that's a part of me that the same way that, the same way that the South Mexico come from you, the same way that Panama comes from you, the same way DR, breeds in you, like where we are now, it breeds in us because it's going to be in our children if we choose. And I think that like my experience is very much of like of getting that somebody coming up to you and being like, oh my, you're Black as well. Like that same thing that you had, Ilda. Somebody came up to me and said, oh, Jivi, you're Black, almost like it was an insult. Almost like it was an insult. Like they expected me to go, oh no, I'm not. I just have a tan. No, and I said, yeah, I am Black. This is like, that's not a, so are you, by the way. And I think it is about like knowing your history. I think that's where the liberation comes from. Your mezclao, your mestiza. I think that to know what you are and to know the history of the place that you come from and the things that made you up, that is where the liberation comes from, because you can say I know, and that is a liberty as well, because there are people who have that stripped from them, that they get dead ends and they can't find a place further. So it's a luxury. I think that I live in a luxury where I can that I afforded that $99 to get my numbers done in. And if you want the one that goes you all the way to Africa, that one costs more than $100. So but it's about reclaiming. It's about reclaiming and claiming where you are now and claiming where you came from before. Thank you.
Yeah, I love so much of that. For me with this question, and then I'll let Wo if you want to like say something about it too.
I have a lot of things to say.
Oh my goodness, resonated so much with what you said, Ilda, is I have a distinct memory like of existential dread in middle school, filling out for a standardized test, getting ready to do whatever state test was necessary, and getting to that question and being like, I don't know how to answer this. And at the time, I can only pick one, and my like kid brain was like, I don't know what to do with this, and so all I did was alternate each test. I just picked one or the other. I just alternated. It was like I panicked. I like didn't know. I hate that question so much. And then I also just like have another very distinct moment of my childhood where I got to see both sides of my family in one summer, where I just remember like my family came in. So the Puerto Ricans were in Arizona. We were all hanging out and we were eating toston. And my auntie came over and gave me, she's like, do you want this sauce? It's like a mayo sauce. Or do you want this sauce, the vinegar sauce? And she's like giving it to me, and I don't even know what anything is called. I just know that this is what we eat. And I tasted both of them, and I was like, I want the vinegar one. And I'll never forget that she said to me, "True blue Puerto Rican." And then like 2 weeks later, we drove to LA. We picked up food in Chinatown. We brought it to my grandma's house. We're sitting there getting ready to eat rice, and I go to eat rice with a fork, and my uncle nearly lost his damn mind because Filipinos eat rice with their hands, and so you have to like do this thing with their hands, and you make a little spoon, and then you use your thumb to push your rice in your mouth. And he was like, your mother never taught you this? And like really, I was just like, I don't know what's happening right now. I'm American. And I was like, I eat with fork and knife, and I can use chopsticks, but maybe not with rice yet. I don't have the dexterity for that. It was just like this was like the worst 2 weeks of my life, where I felt like so confused. And like I'll never forget this like weird push and pull of that summer for me.
Wow. Yes. Yeah. I totally relate to that tug of war. I like to think my family has been like pretty nice about it, but there's always like the little subtle things like, oh, like you look more like your dad, or like, so like on my Mexican side, like everyone says like, oh, you look more black, or like you look more like your dad's side. And then like on my dad's side, everyone's like, oh, you look more like your mom, or like you sound like her, or whatever. And so they just like see the other one in me, and I'm like, it's both. And I'm like, I'm not choosing a side. Like, it's just like, who do you love more? I'm like, neither. Like, but Ilda, I think you had something.
Yeah, just like what you were saying, Jasmine, of like, the thing is that like your situation is very special. In mine is so easy. Like, where are you from? Panama. Done. End of the story. Like, great. But you, like, I understand perfectly when you said like that you don't like to then like have to identify like that, because it's true. Like, the thing is that the world is just starting to get to know that people can be from many places and have like be multicultural. So it is mind blowing that it's like, wait, but you have this like Latinx blood, but also Asian, but you're from America, like the United States of America. No, what do you mean? So I understand that because that when you're asked the question, but where are you from? It's out of like like a racist I don't know, like mindset, or at least just very black and white. Where are you from? I'm from here. If anyone asked me, where are you from? And I'm like, I am from here. But this is because you have some idea that people who are from here don't look like this. People who are from here, if you want to go like based off of what people from here look like, they would be Native Americans. So what is it? Which one is it? Which one is it? um so I've had it very easy, and I cannot imagine this whole like explosion of cultures, and I love it so much because it just opens everyone's mind to like, oh, it is not just black and white. Like getting to experience a race, um that is a whole thing. I guess I experience me being like Latinx, um, and it has worked for me, but I have never had to live the hardships of other races or ethnicities. I'm sorry if I mix up ethnicities and races, because but you know what? When you said mejorar la raza, that's been told to me. That I've been told that. No, you have to mejorar la raza. You have to better the race by people who are married. Like one is like who is white and is married to a black person. So I'm like, so it is not even that they believe it. It's just that that's what they've been told. That's what they hear, and they just repeat it unconsciously. You know, this is not a racist person. It's a person that's actually, I don't mean racist like aggressively. I just mean like they don't think that being white is better than being black. They are literally married to a black person, and yet they say that. Oh, you should better the race. Come on, because that's how they're wired. That's just they're older. They're and I look forward and hope that these things change. You know, like it is just minds are being more open. People are there's more representation in film and TV, showing the rest of the world how someone from Puerto Rico can look like this, and from Panama, like doing the West Side. I was in the movie and people were like, but they need to look like this. And it's like, no. She, who is white, blue-eyed, blonde, is Puerto Rican. Guess what? She's actually from Puerto Rico, but you don't imagine it just because the image you have of Puerto Ricans is more like me and darker. But it cannot go to black either. And it cannot like it cannot be Asian, and it cannot be like anything like I think it's getting better. But I love this conversation. Yeah, I'm gonna stop talking.
I really hope it's getting better too. I think I saw first Maylin and then GB, so we'll go in that order next.
It's just a quick comment about this idea of like when you say you're American and they're like, no, where are you really from? It's because there's this weird conflation that like American means white. And I just thought it was just interesting. I just want to throw that into the mix, if you will.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was talking to Alexandra Gomez from Quemoción, and talking with this assumption that, and I said those exact things, and I said, I am tired of this ideal of Americanism being conflated with white. You can love American culture. You could grow up. So like there's a preconceived notion that like, all Puerto Ricans or all Latinos are raised in the culture. And you can be raised in loving American culture with, loving the Who and growing up and knowing that I Love Lucy is still Latin culture. Going back to I Love Lucy is a mixed race couple raising a mixed race kid in America, and to have this idea of like you have to pick the box. Who are you going to be today? Are you and this platform, we're all speaking with an American lens because we're broadcasting from various places in America, but which is different, experiences around the world when you get into, but everything is based on the lens of Americanism. And in the census, even the census is an American entity, even though it say it's doing its best to be inclusive of other people and not show any kind of preference, but it's still ingrained in there. And that's why they have that little box that you can write in, what you identify as. I wrote in my box in the census this past 2020, I wrote Boricua Taino, because that is what I am. And that's that, like I come from Borican, and I'm a mixed race person. And there is nothing that I can't, like, there's no box that can contain me. And it's still because like I'm still in the situation where I'm in America, but whether, my grandparents wanted America to be in America, to be in America, my great grandparents did or not. That's where I am now, and that's the lens that I have to go through. So just also remembering that, like, this experience, not everybody wanted to be here, whether you wanted to be on this planet or whether you wanted to be in this country. You didn't, some of us didn't have it. Some of us had a choice and some of us didn't have a choice. And we're just making the best of what we have. Um, and the choices that were made for us.
Love so much of that. I know that we're really excited to get to the next juicy question, but I just want to leave a little space on still this topic if anyone wants to say any last things about this one before we move on. I don't know if the thumbs up was because you want to say.
Yeah, what she was saying reminded me of when I was abroad in France, and there my first couple days I was there for a Cannes Film Festival, and my first couple of days I was identifying as American. I was coming from America, from New York, and I was telling everybody I was American, and the French did not like that. They were like, "Fucking American," and I wouldn't speak English, and they would just walk away from me. And on like the third, fourth day, I decided to start speaking Spanish and saying that I was from Dominican Republic, and they treated me so much better, like so much better. And I don't have anything against the French, and I hope they don't have anything against me. But that was my experience, and I looked exactly the same. My skin, nothing changed besides the fact that I went from saying that I was American to saying that I was Dominican. And then it made me think of, like, why didn't I ever use the word Latino? But then for me, that's sort of like an experience that we go through only in America. The second that I leave America, I think twice before using Latino as my descriptor or ethnicity. So yeah, that.
Yes, we were actually just talking about that in our last cafecito. We went all into Latinx, Latine, Latino, all that stuff. And it's definitely like an American lens.
Yes.
But we do want to move on to our next juicy question. So, as we all know, last year in June and July, there was a huge, rally around Black Lives Matter. And it was kind of like a line got drawn in the sand a little bit, and people had to, you know, decide where they stood. Um, and so we want to ask you guys, like, as multiracial people, how did you navigate that dynamic, and like, how did that moment feel for you?
I can start. I was very careful about taking the streets and marching against like with the masses, and for health reasons. I was like, oh my God, we're in a pandemic, and people want to rally and people want to get together and start movements that but I still went out and I still marched, and I still haven't gotten COVID. I hope none of you guys have gotten COVID either, and that you don't get it. And if you have, then I'm glad you guys are alive and still with us. And but yes, I took the streets, and it kind of was one of the reasons why I decided to paint the mural that I painted, Yo Amo Mi Mezcla, and it was the best thing I could have done in the moment, because it started a ripple effect, and all I wanted to do was be outside painting murals with beautiful messages that did connect and make the people think, and the power of murals. So I think that from the marches, I went to just starting my own mural, and from that, other of my friends started making murals with similar messages, and next thing you know, we got invited to like Soho to tag up in Soho, and then Soho started a whole coalition of art and artists and murals too, and then the whole thing I just saw it all panned out in front of me. I was like, oh my God, it it did start in Washington Heights. It was like my little crew of artists, and it felt nice to be recognized and for them not to just take our movement and to like invite us to paint down there with them with much more resources, because we were literally painting with a couple brushes and a couple cans that we got from like a couple stores that wanted to donate. But that was the ripple effect on my end. I just took on the streets and I started to paint.
I love that. I think I saw GV wanted to say something.
Thank you. So I'm an arts educator in Brooklyn. And so when the summer, well, I've been practicing, working with Black Lives Matters movement that's been going around since 2016 and even before that. So I, as an literacy manager, what I do is I create the after school reading curriculum for the elementary kids. And so just creating a multiracial, multicultural curricula of books for students of color, by students or by people of color, telling stories that are about people that look like them, is at the cornerstone of my work. And so making sure that everything I did is shows the next generation, these are wonderful possibilities for you. These are your stories. What are your stories? What is it that you want to stand up for? Going straight from Latin American, when it was Hispanic American Heritage Month into Native American Heritage Month, then going straight from Dr. King's birthday into Black History Month, and keep that going through Women's History Month, and then Poetry History Month. And the next thing you know, we're in April, and we have been doing beautiful stories the whole year. And so it's about education for me, and it's about like grabbing a book and getting people to tell their stories, make art and share art, so that the cycle continues, to know that students can learn about, not just learn artificially about another person's culture, but really go through a whole experience with them, and have strong takeaways, not just a one and done, but multiple units, books, you know, uh, arietos, canciones, everything that's just going to fill their cup, to create a deeper well for them to forge their own identity, to fill the next census out.
Yeah. I know that for me personally, I am in a few different groups of people, and I try to be in different spaces, including a dance group connected with La Mama, whose goal is to continue the traditional oral storytelling and dance heritage of the Philippines. And so during this whole process, we were, very firsthand trying to like forward our own social goals, social justice goals, and seeing that the Asian community at large was having a moment, with all of this stuff being things being called the China virus, watching people get very scared very suddenly, watching the Asian community, like for the first time in a long time, face such aggressive and violent racism, and then having them almost turn that without seeing how obviously connected and worse it is in the Black community has been a hill. We are not anywhere closer to like squaring that circle and making more people aware of how honestly trivial 6 months of aggressive racism is to hundreds of years. But like we were trying to bring at least some of that to the table in my own group. I know, Wo, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna respond to what Judy was saying about like using art as a way of like, educating people on their culture. And I think it's like so amazing that we're all like multiracial artists, because like sort of what I do, like every time I create something, like especially my music, I feel like it's always a mix of like my heritage and like who I am, and like it comes out a certain way because like I have this mixed heritage, and like, you know, it doesn't like necessarily like always conform to like one genre or like one thing, because I don't do that either. So like I don't know if y'all have experienced the same thing like in your artistic lives, where it's like, you know, people want you to fit into a certain box like for a certain role or something, or like a certain project, and it's just like not happening.
So I was auditioning, and I had always been taught since I had a thick regional accent from New York. I was working my whole life, and all my acting classes was just like, just get a standard American accent so that you can go out and, you know, audition for any other kind of role. So I go into the audition room, and the role is a Latina, but I didn't care about that. I'm just reading the words, and they're like, but aren't you Latina? And I said, yeah. They were like, so why are you reading it like that? I'm like, and I hadn't even thought that, like, and I said, so what, you want me to talk like this? Like, is this what you're looking for? And, but I was so upset because, like, you know, we should be able to exist outside of our race as well. Like, I'm not only a Latina, like I have other stuff going on. I'm a whole other person too, but it's people's just preconceived notions that I have to that I have to be performative. And again, it's like, you don't, like, okay, don't come in, don't be performative. This is not the Mita show. We're not doing the Mita show. Just to be our authentic self, and that's what I think that we're just working towards, like just being our authentic selves and not having to be performative. That I have to put on the accent as well as just or anything else, and I can just let the situation bring the emotion out. All right, thank you.
Yeah, and then we'll go over to Hilda and her amazing reactions to being told to speak more Latina.
Oh my God. No, like that's, yeah, no. I think of last year, the biggest thing, I went into like a bit of shock because like social media, everything was very aggressive at one point. Like even people who wanted to help somehow. I am happy like that Henry and you found like perfect outlets to express your point of views and your love and in your opinions, because I felt like I didn't know what to do. I felt like there were many opinions online of like, you should be doing this. Oh, if you're doing this and it's just for show. If you're not saying anything, that you're doing it wrong. It's like, oh God. And I think what I took the most from last year in general was empathy, like just that word of the lack of empathy that exists. Why can we just be, like we were saying, why can you just be a person and be treated like a human being, period? Like sencillito. Why? And it is very, I was going to say a little, but it's very ironic to me to think that the US is not considered a melting pot. I said, oh, Panama is a melting pot. Guess what? The US is a melting pot. There are people from everywhere in the world here. There are people like, there's so many people from around the world that there's a green card lottery. You don't have that in Panama, and you have people from everywhere there too. So many people from around the world want to come here, and I just wonder. I understand the history of the country and why it is the way it is and why it's black and white, but I wonder when is it going to be considered a melting pot and open to it. Yeah, we have people from everywhere. Hello, the Statue of Liberty, like in the message that it reads. But when is it actually going to be considered that a melting pot, an open melting pot of, yes, with its laws and immigration things, but yeah, just that. people here in this country come from everywhere. People even who were born here have heritages that are from everywhere. And I could talk to you guys about this for many, many, many hours, because
Right.
it's just, I don't know, it baffles me. Like, it sounds so simple, but this comes with like years and years and years of oppression and racism and things that are just, this is the way it is. So thank you for this space and your opinions.
Oh my gosh, thank you
Yeah.
guys for joining us today, which is actually, we're getting towards the end. That's how quick this went. Well, I just wanted to, we're going to give everyone opportunity to speak again one more time, so say whatever closing you would like to say about yourself or anything else we missed that you wanted to make sure was mentioned in the space. But I did have one last thing from the research that Pew had done a few years ago, which is that for some, racial identity has changed. Not all adults with a mixed racial background consider themselves multiracial. In fact, 61% do not. Of those that selected 2 or more races on the census for the study, only 4 in 10 adults said they had a mixed racial background and considered themselves to be mixed race or multiracial. An added layer of complexity is that racial identity can be fluid, is what they've decided, and may change over the course of one's life or even from one situation to another. I'm sure we're all very familiar with code switching. And 3 in 10 adults with multiracial backgrounds say that they've changed the way they describe their race over the years, with some saying they once thought themselves as one race and now think of themselves as more than one, or others saying the opposite. But yeah, I just found it extremely fascinating that fully 61% say they don't consider themselves to be racial despite filling in 2 bubbles. And with that, I just wanted to give everyone the opportunity to say one last bit before we close.
Yeah, because I feel like what the last thing I said was my closing statement. I feels more like that, but that is fascinating. Is it maybe because you are presented with, you have to choose all these things, like you have to choose either or many, and the way we experience race, the people experience race, maybe they experience it just very unilaterally, like just this is how I experience it, but they have done their like ancestry research and their 23andMe and et cetera, and they do know their percentages, but they experience it as Black, white, I don't know, Latina, Latinx, I don't know. Is it because of that? Again, trying to check in boxes. So hard. So hard. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna look into that. That's fascinating. Uy.
Yeah. Maylene?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how there's this weird, complicated thing that happens where we experience race in one way, and then we're perceived, our race is perceived in a different way. So I wonder if that's what makes people sort of shift where they identify, right? Like I know if I'm in a room of just white people, I don't feel white, even though that is racially what's in my mix, right? It's this weird thing because they're not perceiving me as white. And also our movement in the world is different, right? Their skin and phenotypically, they are viewed and accepted a certain way versus the way I'm viewed and accepted, right? So yeah, it's just that weird thing of perception and experience. Yeah.
So again, my experience again with the sense, like to me, it's all coming down to like the census. And other than like the standardized forms we took as children, because often our entire childhood is being asked like what race we are, and we become aware of races of other children around the age of kindergarten. That's when studies have found that young children find, like discover and want to start hanging out with people who look like them. And I want to talk a little bit or like bring up the fact that these systems like the census are meant to erase us, because I am reminded of in Spain, in Puerto Rico, in the 1780 census, they cataloged about 3,000 native indigenous people on the island of Borinquen. And when they took the census again in 1800, they said gather up all the Indians. But so they just went around the town and they got all of the native people that they were around, and they said, okay, now that there are only 60 people on the entire island. So these censuses are like, you can have a paper genocide. These censuses are made to erase people and promote homogeny. And it's up to everybody to be counted. It's up to everybody to fight for their count, to not be erased, to make sure that that we are honoring like the things that are important to us. If your culture is important to you, then that's what you should hold up. If you're yeah, period. And so just stand up and fight for your right to be counted. And don't let, because the oppressor wants to erase you, period.
And Henry.
Well, in closing, thank you, all of you guys, for everything that you've shared. It really has made me more knowledgeable today. And I just want to say that perception, it really isn't reality, and that don't let anyone color you. You choose your color, and that no one can take our experiences away from us, and that we can take those experiences and make art with it and share it. And I encourage you guys to do that.
I love it. Yes, it's been such a joy talking to all of you. Yeah, there's too many things to say. I feel like this is like just the beginning of a longer conversation, and I think just like the big theme that keeps coming to me is that like people just need to open their minds. Like people just need to like take an extra second to like make space for people who don't fit into a binary, like when it comes to race, but this is like also about like gender too. It's a very similar thing where it's like people just want their boxes so they don't have to like take the time to get to know you. And so like it takes courage for us to like step out into the world as like our full selves and be like, I am this, and like there's no one else with my mix maybe, or like there's two other people with my mix, but like it does not matter because this is me.
Yeah,
So
and I don't have really anything additionally to say before we close, other than I'm super grateful for all of you beautiful, generous people for sharing your time and your stories with us. Yes, so I can't believe that hour went by so quickly.
Cheers.
salud.
Thank you guys so much. Yo amo mi mezcla.
Cheers.
So, I'm
Vamos mi mezcla.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.